A table. First meeting. Everyone is smiling in that careful, friendly way. Before names settle, numbers arrive. Birth years. One person offers theirs, the next answers. Then the next. Lightly. Almost cheerfully. I smile too, because I know the routine. And still, something tightens in me. A small thought I don't say. I don't like this setup from the start. If I can feel like a stranger in soul, and a stranger abroad, what is it exactly that I belong to? I'm making this channel to rethink what being Korean has meant in my life, using my own language for it. Not an export version. Not to explain Korea. Not to summarize it into neat points. I want to stay with what doesn't translate well. Because being Korean is still a big part of who I am. Just not in loud ways. More in subtler ones. In how care is often indirect. In how emotions travel through actions, not declarations. In how silence isn't always empty. Sometimes it's considerate. Sometimes it's heavy. Sometimes it's love. That's where I recognize myself. And I also recognize the confusion. How I can feel out of place here, and out of place elsewhere. This is only one person's experience, shaped by my own life. It won't stand in for anyone else's. Back at that table, the birth year answers keep going around. What surprises me isn't that people ask. It's how quickly the room becomes organized around the answer. A tiny pause. Like someone recalculates the shape of the conversation. Not out of malice. More like muscle memory. And I understand why it happens. A birth year isn't just a number. It becomes a map. How you speak to me. How quickly we can be casual. Who pours the first drink? Who is older and who becomes younger? Sometimes even what kind of kindness is allowed. I've lived inside that map long enough to read it without thinking. But my body still reacts like I'm being placed before I've arrived. In that half second, I can feel my voice preparing itself. Softer. Smaller. A little more careful. So I do what I've always been good at. I become easy. I listen carefully. I nod at the right moments. I laughed softly. Not too loudly. I offer warmth first, so no one has to wonder what to do with me. And in the middle of it, I catch myself thinking, I want to be met before I'm sorted. I didn't mind the question. What I felt was the way the answer immediately organized me. For a long time, I thought this was maturity. Being smooth. Being considerate. Being low maintenance. Not making anyone uncomfortable. I learned to scan a room before I entered it. If I couldn't read the room, I read the people. The rhythm of the group. The way laughter lands. The hierarchy you can feel without anyone naming it. And then I adjusted. Not in one dramatic way. In dozens of small ones. How long my smile lasted. How much I revealed. How quickly I agreed. How carefully I phrased anything that might create friction. Sometimes I'd walk home afterwards and realize I couldn't remember what I'd actually said. Only what I'd managed. The right reactions. The right timing. The right level of closeness. It's strange, because there are parts of this that I genuinely love. I love that care can arrive sideways. I love the small gestures that say, "I noticed you," without announcing it. I love affection that shows up as an action, not a speech. A refill before your glass is empty. A message that doesn't ask questions, just says, "Eat something." Someone waiting one extra stop so you don't walk alone. But there's another side to it too. If you're sensitive, you can start living like a tuning fork, always vibrating to other people's frequencies. And slowly, you forget what your own note sounds like. In those rooms, I wasn't exactly lying. I was just editing, offering the version of myself that would land safely. It wasn't that I had nothing inside. Being easy was never the goal. Being safe was. When I lived abroad, I expected the feeling to disappear. New city, new language, new rules. I thought I'd finally stop shrinking, but the same habit followed me. In group conversations, I was competent. I listened. I reacted. I made space. I could make people feel interesting even when I didn't talk much about myself. And then at some point, someone would say it, sometimes kindly, sometimes puzzled. "You're hard to read." I used to laugh because it sounded like a personality trait, like something permanent about my face. But later, alone, I understood what they were noticing. They weren't describing my expression, they were describing my distance. Because I rarely shared anything private. I could speak about work, about plans, about opinions, but not about longing, not about fear, not about the tender places. I offered reflections, not confession, and people can feel that. They can sense when you're present as a surface. Even small things gave me away. The way I could explain my day, but not my mood. The way I could translate facts, but not myself. So even far from soul, in a different language, I was still doing the same thing, holding myself back, politely. Hard to read wasn't my nature, it was my strategy, a way I learned to stay safe by becoming a mirror. Eventually, the cost showed up where it mattered, with friends, with a partner, in the small moments that should have been easy. A question like, "How are you, really?" And my mouth would reach for something light, something acceptable, something that wouldn't change the atmosphere. Sometimes I could hear myself doing it in real time, agreeing a little too quickly, laughing a little too long, offering reassurance instead of truth. Not because I was trying to deceive anyone, because I still believed, somewhere in my body, that being real would create trouble, that honesty would become a burden I'd have to manage. And the strangest part is this: I wasn't trying to impress people with greatness. I was trying to impress them with ease, to prove I was pleasant, manageable, not complicated, as if closeness was something you earned by being simple. But love doesn't grow in auditions. Friendship doesn't either. You can't be known if you keep offering a perfectly translated version of yourself. I could feel myself doing it, turning down my own volume before anyone else had to. I sat with that for a long time, not with anger, just a quiet, specific recognition of what had been happening. If I keep being good in every room, approachable, unthreatening, easy, who exactly is being loved? My version of belonging became selective honesty. I keep my boundaries, and I still offer something real. The change for me wasn't dramatic. It was more like fatigue. One day, I noticed I was living as if I was constantly being evaluated, in Seoul, abroad, everywhere. And I thought, what if I stop auditioning? Not by becoming harsh, not by oversharing, but by becoming deliberate. If something makes me uncomfortable, I don't donate it to the room just to be liked. If I don't want to share it, I don't. And if there is something true, something that actually shows who I am, I try to share that instead. A real preference, a real thought, a real feeling stated simply, without apologizing for it. It can be small. I'd rather not talk about that. Or, actually, I felt lonely that week. Or, I don't agree, but I'm trying to understand. Nothing dramatic, just a line that lets me be present as a person, not a performance. It changes the shape of a conversation, because now I'm not only reacting to other people, I'm also here, not perfectly, but honestly in a way I can sustain. So that's why this channel exists, not to package Korea into something tidy, not to translate everything into clean statements, but to sit with what feels Korean to me quietly and notice what it did to my life. When I think back to that table, the birth years going around, my voice already preparing itself before I'd said a word, I feel something like tenderness for that version of me. She wasn't broken. She was trying to survive belonging. There is something I love about being Korean that isn't flashy, that doesn't export neatly. Something embedded in people and relationships, small gestures, unspoken offerings, the way care can arrive without calling itself care. I want this channel to be a quiet archive of that, the love and the friction, the gestures, the silences, the indirect care that can hold you, and the same indirectness that can sometimes leave you unsure of where you stand. I want to let it stay personal, because the more specific I get about my own experience, the more I suspect it can reach someone else's private mind too, not as a map for them, just as permission to feel their own in-between. I still don't know if I belong in one place, but I know I don't want to keep shrinking for belonging. So maybe the question isn't, where is home? Maybe it's, what would change if you stopped rehearsing the easiest version of yourself and offered one true thing instead, quietly, just once, and see what happens?